Hi everybody, it's Miss V. Hope you're all doing well on this Thursday and that your checking in chemistry assignment went well yesterday. So today is a really exciting day because we are going to start a brand new unit. We are going to start learning about ecosystems. And this is a unit that I personally love. This is something that I've studied a lot in university and that I loved having conversations with students about. And it's also something that students tend to already have a good idea on, a good basis, if you will, right? We interact with ecosystems on a daily basis. We are a part of an ecosystem. You also, watched movies and read little magazine clips growing up talking about ecosystems and our interactions, right? Think about Lion King. If you watch that and you talk about how, Mufasa explains the circle of life, we all know that animals have interactions and those interactions are going to affect other things in that ecosystem. And that's exactly what we're going to be talking about in this unit and going through a few different concepts and ideas that may be new to you or maybe a refresher, and how they actually apply to the life around us. Okay, so first we're going to go through a few intro, what should you remember ideas. Got to start with the basics before we add on top of those. So feel free to listen along and add on to a chore, or you can watch the video as well. I'm just going to be going through the note slides and adding a few things in. Okay, so very first thing we got to talk about is what a population is. Now, I hope that none of you have seen this image as you walked outside one day. Could be possible, might be slightly terrifying, but this is a population. A population is a group of organisms of the same species that are living in the same area at the same time. Okay, so even another example would be the population of Steinbach. That is the population of humans of the same species living in the same area at the same time. All right, and now we can look at this little picture right here and say, okay, well in this picture, population is the population of my gazelles in this environment. Okay, they're all the same animal, they're living there at the same time, and they're living in the same place. We can zoom out even more and now look at what a community and an ecosystem mean. Okay, so a community is composed of all of the populations that live and interact in that particular area. You can see now I have my population of zebras, of lions, of gazelles, all these different animals and how they interact together with one another. That is a community. So the community of Steinbach wouldn't just be humans, it's also going to be cats, dogs, insects, any other living population that interacts with us. You can also now zoom out even further and look at an ecosystem. What actually is an ecosystem? Well, it is when all of these living things in this community are now also interacting with non-living factors, like this little bird right here, how it's interacting with the water and the stream. Or now we are also going to be looking at time of day or the climate, right? These are all things that are non-living that are going to be affecting the living things living there. So that is the technical term for an ecosystem, is a community of organisms interacting with non-living factors in that environment. Now you might think that ecosystems have to be fairly large, like forests, rivers, in order to have both living and non-living components. However, they can also be very small, like a rotting log or a puddle of water. Both of these have living things like microorganisms or insects and non-living components like water or soil. So these are technically ecosystems too. Ecosystems can also be called terrestrial, which is just a fancy word meaning that they're located on land, or aquatic, which is just a fancy term saying that they are located in water. Now this is just a little picture going over how a rotting log can actually make a community and an ecosystem. So we have our dying and dead log right here, and you can tell that there's a lot of different organisms living on it and because of it and the nutrients that it's providing. So we have some fungi or some mushrooms growing on the side here. We also have some plants kind of sprouting out around the one end of it, or the moss growing on top. We also have a variety of insects that are living from this log, as well as a bird that is now going to be eating those insects. So we have a lot of different living things, and they're all there because of the non-living nutrients that are available in this log, making it an ecosystem. All right. So every ecosystem, as a recap, has biotic, which means living, and abiotic, which means non-living parts. And you may be able to think off the top of your head of a few living and non-living parts of an ecosystem. Biotic factors are typically plants, animals, microorganisms, whereas abiotic or non-living factors tend to be water, oxygen, light, temperature, nutrients, all of those important things that we need and that are essential to survival. An ecosystem can also be healthy or not so healthy, depending on the relationships that are happening within it, between those animals and those non-living factors. If any of you have been to Lake Winnipeg within the past few years, you may have seen that wonderful green sludge, right? That green algae that sometimes appears on its beaches. And that is an indicator of an unhealthy ecosystem. Something is not in balance there. And we're actually going to talk about this a little bit later on in our unit. But it also is very evident that this is an unhealthy ecosystem compared to, the bright, crystal clear lakes that you see in all those Instagram photos. Now, interactions within an ecosystem or between two different ecosystems all depend on a constant flow of energy, right? I need energy in order to make this video. You need energy to listen to it, to run a marathon, to study for a test. Everything we do depends on energy. And that's the same for our ecosystems. They actually always happen in this nice little pyramid right here. And we're going to come back to this multiple times, so just keep in mind that this is a very important cycle of our energy and how it flows. It starts with our producers, our things that make the energy, our plants. It's going to get transferred up to the animals that eat those plants, right? Then it's going to get transferred to the animals that eat those animals. And then once again, to another consumer or carnivore of some type. The energy goes up the pyramid in smaller amounts, as you may notice, as it gets higher and higher up. And what you'll notice is that all organisms on Earth rely on the sun, right? This very base layer here depends on the sun. Plants harness energy from the sun, and without that, the rest of our energy pyramid would not be able to gain energy. And so how do we harness light energy from the sun? A very fancy process called photosynthesis. Hopefully you remember this from another science class you've taken. So photosynthesis is a process in which cells in plants, in algae, even some bacteria are going to convert light energy from the sun into chemical energy. Okay, so think of, it's going to make that light energy into chemical energy in the form of like a sugar or some type of chemical bond. Once it's made into that chemical bond and animals eat it, right? Some of us eat those fruits and veggies. We now have to be able to get that energy and break it out of that chemical bond, make it into some type of usable form. And this is where cellular respiration happens. Now, some of you may remember this funny little meme that goes around on the internet every once in a while, the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. That's where this comes in. So your mitochondria are sitting in your cells in your body, And those are the powerhouse that is going to break down your chemical energy, say from a piece of sugar you ate, and it's going to make it into usable energy that your body can now use to run, to do some homework, to go about your everyday life. Now, a producer is any organism that gets energy and it needs by making its own food. Now, I really wish I was like a plant and I could, do photosynthesis. I could walk outside for an hour and be full. I would also be green, which would be really cool. But unfortunately, I can't do that. Instead, these cool guys get to do it, right? Plants, grasses, algae, all those sorts of things. A consumer is an organism that gets energy by eating producers or other consumers. So I have cute little bunnies over here, right? They're having a nice little snack, and they're eating the energy that was made by those plants. Now, some animals, they don't really like salads. They don't like their leafy greens. Instead, they would prefer to get their energy and nutrients by eating other consumers that have already eaten these plants for them. Okay, so all energy can kind of be summed up and flowed through using food chains and food webs. A food chain goes in a straight line across, and it shows you the transfer of energy. It starts with the sun, that is where all energy starts, and it gets harnessed by some type of producer, some type of plant that is going to photosynthesize and convert that light energy into chemical energy. Now the energy is going to get transferred over to my grasshopper once it eats it. Okay, this is my primary consumer, my first person to eat it. Okay, once my primary consumer is consumed by my secondary consumer, that energy is now going to be transferred up the chain. And once again to my owl, once my owl eats the shrew. Now, this is a very straight chain. And one thing you have to notice is that, well, there's more than just grasshoppers that can eat grass, right? I could have deer, I could have another animal. There can also be other animals that would eat shrews, not just owls. Maybe there's a fox. So there are multiple little options and branches that could happen here. And that's where we get to something that looks a lot more like this, like a food web. This shows us multiple options in an ecosystem of what can happen to our energy flow. Right? So I have my producer here, maybe I have some nuts. Those can actually be eaten by two primary producers. They could be eaten by a bird or they could be eaten by a squirrel. Right? So this gives you a little bit more of a realistic idea of what can happen in an ecosystem, right? If one animal for some reason, disappears from our ecosystem, that food is still accessible to another individual. In fact, it might be better because now they have less competition for the same food source. One thing that is not mentioned in the previous food chain or food web are the decomposers. These are kind of like the underdogs of the ecosystem. They actually obtain energy by consuming dead plant and animal matter. These are like your nasty bacteria, your fungi, snails, bugs, all those fun things, but they do something very important. As soon as any of these animals, my secondary, my primary, tertiary consumers pass on, or even my producers for that matter, as soon as they pass on, my decomposers are going to be able to break down those nutrients and put them back into the system for my plants to take up and to begin the cycle again. They are a really important part in recycling matter and energy through our system. Okay, so once again, with this trophic pyramid, right, it's a model that shows the transfer of energy from one level of organism to the next. So we always have producers on the bottom, our primary consumers next, secondary consumers, and then our tertiary consumers at the very top. You will also notice that a little bit of energy is lost at each stage, meaning that the higher up the food chain, the less energy you gain from that one meal. And this is because it's usually lost as heat. All right, so this is a small video talking about how wolves actually changed the shape of rivers in Yellowstone National Park just by being reintroduced to the area. How can a living thing affect a non-living thing like a river? This is a really good video that I encourage you guys to watch after going through this note. All right, so all producers and consumers use nutrients to grow and carry out their life functions, right? We all need nutrients in order to have a healthy life. When organisms die, decomposers are now going to return those nutrients back to the environment. That's what makes them so important. And this pattern, this circle of life, if you will, is called a nutrient cycle. Now, photosynthesis and cellular respiration play a very, very important role in the transfer of energy and the cycling of matter through these ecosystems. It's very important that we understand this concept and that we go over it a few times. Okay, so photosynthesis uses carbon dioxide, right? This is what plants do. Plants breathe in carbon dioxide and they take in water. They're going to take the light from the sun and harness it, and together it's going to now make sugars, typically called glucose, and oxygen. That is what it's going to release. So it may make some sugar compounds in the leaves that we can eat, as well as going to emit a gas of oxygen that we can breathe. Plants are pretty cool. Now, on the other side of things, in cellular respiration, that glucose that is made and oxygen that was just produced by our plants, right? Those are things that we are going to take in as humans, as animals, and we are actually going to produce things as well. So imagine, I don't know, I'd have a meal, I maybe have a slice of pie, okay? And I also take a very deep breath in. What I'm going to produce from those two things is carbon dioxide when I breathe out, water, which is usually used in your body for different cellular processes, as well as energy. ATP is the technical term for this. You learn a little bit more about it in grade 11 bio. Okay? But right now I just want you to know that it's energy. This is the energy that you're now going to be able to use to do different activities. And so it's interesting that these two chemical equations, oh my goodness, are very linked, right? I start with carbon dioxide and water. I end with sugar and oxygen with my plant. And then with my human, I start with sugar and oxygen, and I'm going to end with water and carbon dioxide as well as that energy. They're kind of two sides of the same coin. And that's what this image is really starting to illustrate. Say we start with my bunny, right? My bunny is breathing, obviously. It's a breathing, living bunny, yay. So it's going to be making carbon dioxide as well as water. Those are things that can then be absorbed by my plant, right? Plants need carbon dioxide and water. It's also going to harness that sunlight, and it's going to create glucose and oxygen. Now it's perfect because these are the things that my bunny needs to live. So it's going to breathe in that oxygen. It's also probably going to have a little snack on leaves on this plant and obtain some glucose. And now the mitochondria in my rabbit cells can create heat or ATP energy and the byproducts again of carbon dioxide and water. And you can see the cycle continues. You can see how linked mammals and plants are to one another through photosynthesis and cellular respiration. All right. Now, ecosystems are also constantly changing, right? In just the small time that I've lived between Ontario and Manitoba, I've seen many different changes in the landscape. And an interesting thing is called succession. This is a series of natural changes in an ecosystem that occurs over time following a disturbance. So, if any of you have seen an area that's been destroyed by a forest fire, a windstorm, or even just the construction of a beaver dam, it changes the environment. And you can see how it continues to change it years and years afterwards, after it tries to, come back from this disturbance. So at first we have primary succession. This is the very first type of succession that happens in areas that have never had living things in them before. So typically they don't have soil. Think of like a lava flow, right? There's no living soil there. And usually you actually see a lot of lichen, that's this green stuff on the rocks here, trying to actually break down some of those rocks into smaller materials so that things can start, being built out of them. Secondary succession is something we're a little more familiar with. This occurs in areas that were previously inhabited. So this picture right here is of a forest fire. You can tell right after the forest fire that there's very little grass on the ground. The trees are scorched halfway up. It's pretty much destroyed. A year later, you can tell that now there's some grasses that are starting to grow in places. I'm not seeing any new growth of trees just yet. That will probably take a little bit longer. Further down here, sorry guys, you can also see some man-made destruction as well. This is some forest clear cutting happening here. So when this happens, you can tell it's going to take a very long time before I can come back and see these really big, beautiful trees here. It's going to take many years for these to regrow, and I'm not going to be able to come back next year and see this, right? It's going to take a very long time. So each of the stages of succession is ideal for different species. If I look here at this picture, this is an area that has been affected by deforestation, where humans cut down all the trees but never replanted them. Animals, some of them can succeed in areas like this that survive in wide open plains, right? Think of small rodents. They don't need places to hide. They can typically burrow into the ground. They will be fine here. However, animals such as bears, deer, things that need large areas for shelter and coverage are not going to succeed in this area. They have to live in areas where they have lots of coverage and where plants have grown for a very long time. Climax community is a stable and mature community where very little change happens for the species inhabiting that community. They're very stable, and this is kind of the best place for them to be. Now, sustainable ecosystem, and you may have heard this word before. Sustainability has become a very popular word within the past 5 years or so in sustainable living. This is where an ecosystem is capable of withstanding pressure and can give support to a variety of organisms. It means it's very hardy. Okay. Sustainable also just means to support or to endure. So when I think about sustainably, chopping firewood, I have to be careful and make sure that the amount of firewood I take is not going to affect how this ecosystem supports me or other organisms that rely on it. Sustainable ecosystems endure, but they also support a wide variety of organisms. You will see that healthy, sustainable ecosystems can sustain a large variety of animals. In fact, people and many other organisms rely on ecosystems for important things like shelter, water, oxygen, and food. And so it's very important that we take care of this sustainable ecosystem so that it can take care of us. One last point that's very interesting to think about is how some organisms actually rely on multiple ecosystems. So right now, right, as a human, I rely on the ecosystem of, Canada, of Manitoba, to help keep me alive. However, there are also some animals that migrate. So they're relying on the ecosystems of both of the places they live in to be happy and healthy in order for them to survive. A good example of this is monarch butterflies. In the summer, many of them live in southern Manitoba here. However, in the winter, they actually migrate down to southern US as well as Mexico for breeding and overwintering. So when an ecosystem is down in southern Manitoba, their population is going to suffer. And if their ecosystem in the United States or Mexico are down, they're also going to be hurt that way as well. This is a really cool picture, actually, of butterflies on trees in Mexico while they're overwintering. You might think that this isn't real, but it truly is. So imagine, right, there were some issues in previous years for places where these butterflies overwinter, where they were chopping down many of the trees. So this is going to be an issue now because my monarch butterflies won't have a place to overwinter. So when one ecosystem, right, when they fly down to Mexico to, overwinter and there's no trees there for them to do that on, their population is going to suffer in both places. All right, so that's the end of the slides. I hope that you enjoyed it and that we are all ready to start our new unit on ecosystems. I hope you guys have a great day. You're staying safe, washing your hands. I miss everybody, and I hope to see you all soon sometime. All right. Have a great day, everybody.